So what you can see is I've got a little bit of a pre-done shape of what we're going to be working on this morning. And you can see it's something that we call a bit of a parasol shape. If you think of parasol is generally like an umbrella shape, so something that's round. So it's essentially a bit of a round shape that's incorporating a minimal amount of graduation through the bottom edge, as well as some layering through the internal aspect, just to really help lighten the shape and to build some expansion back through the finished result. It's a very, very simple technique in theory to exercise, but a difficult one to accomplish. Essentially, what I'll be doing is going to be working with just diagonal back section patterns through each panel of the head. So I have a right and a left side panel, subdividing the anatomy of the head into two, working through these diagonal back sections and essentially just over directing everything to almost one consistent point. And I'll be utilizing the plie razor just to keep a soft edge through the shape of the haircut. The difficulty is just every section that I take is remembering the same points of either the elevation and the over direction that was utilized in the previous to create consistency of shape and balance between the right and the left. So let's get to it. Don't have anything in the hair other than what I've shampooed and conditioned this morning, and we used the Blue Deluxe Reparative Shampoo and the Deluxe Reparative Mask to really hydrate the hair. And we'll talk a little bit about the essence of blue and why it was created and what it's inspired from, kind of as we begin to work through the shape. So for time, I've gone ahead and cut half of the mannequin so far, and I've done her right side, and you can begin to see the shape just softly developing as it begins to naturally dry. So I'm going to work through the left side. So in doing so, I'm going to be utilizing a more of a wide tooth comb to really begin to loosen up the tension of the hair, because as we know, when we cut curly hair, the more tension we use, the more it's going to expand back. So I know that I'm going to be utilizing the razor, so I need a good amount of tension on the hair within the fingers just to hold it, but I really don't want to stretch it too much within the combing. And I'll exemplify that as I'm working through the first few sections. And again, I'm going to be utilizing the plie razor. So it's a basic straight razor opposed to the guarded razor. You can use the guarded razor for this, and you can even use the scissor. It's just going to be a different technique with each tool that you choose to use. So I'm going to close that down for 1 second, and we'll take the mannequin. I'm going to spin her to a profile. So now you've got pretty much the left side of her head facing you. And the hair is damp, but I'm going to give it a little bit more saturation with water. So just a really light mist, keeping everything well hydrated. Let that run out. And then what we'll do is we're going to start with the wide teeth of the comb. And the first thing I want to do is I want to work a diagonal back section. Let me see a step around real quick. There we go. A little bit more like so. So I'm going to work a diagonal back section that is dense enough that's going to incorporate all of the front hairline. And when I take this diagonal back section, what I'm really beginning to do is I'm looking at possibly the negative space that can happen around the recession within the hairline here. So if it's really negative, meaning that it's weak in this area, some tricks that I like to do is rather than just taking a consistently straight section, I'll come back in and then I'll begin just to kind of incorporate a little bit more, and then I'll flatten out that section, making it consistent again, something like that. It's a little bit wonky, if you will, but what it does is it gives me the density that I'm looking for that's going to be consistent through that front section. This mannequin, although that I'm working on, is pretty well balanced. So as I drop this down, again, assessing the hair that's falling through, because really what I'm looking to do is in this first section here is just to create a really nice consistent edge. And sometimes when it's really weak, it's hard to see where that line may be going. So I'm going to take this hair and just pin it back, releasing this down. And then what we'll do is, again, possibly a little bit more water. It's very important. And I've got no cutting lotion on the hair. It's very important that when we cut this, that we can see the natural response of the hair and not allowing for any other product to begin to weigh it down. So the only weight that the hair has on it right now is, one, obviously the gravity dragging it down, but also two, just the moisture saturation that I have from the water. So spin. We'll get the cutting locked down. There we are. So this first section, I'm going to go ahead and reference the length that I've cut on the opposite side. And I know that I wanted this hair to spring up and to have this kind of like heavier fringe, but because of obviously the retraction of the retraction of the curl, I knew that I was going to have to cut it long. So I went ahead and cut that first length. When I stretched it out, it was sitting really about the lip length. And then as I released it from the tension of the fingers, as well as the utilization of that razor, you can see that it definitely shrunk up and it began to sit more into the bridge of the bridge of the nose. So bringing this down, figuring out so I don't block the camera. Let's the spinner. So now coming back into the tighter teeth with this comb, but you can even see that the tighter teeth are still a bit wide. I've got my length guide from the opposite side. You can see the finger angle, let that length guide slip back out. And now what I'm going to begin to do is I'm utilizing the tip of the razor, just the edge, just to begin to take off the length, giving it a very, very soft finished end result. So you can see that the hair is definitely not shattered. It's got the length off and the end result is soft. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work kind of in thirds as I work through each section. So really referencing the transitions of the skull. So I've got this kind of frontal bone. So that would be like 1/3. And then as it begins to wrap around from the parietal ridge down to like the lower recession, that would be my second third. And then my last bit is really going to be when I begin to hit that lower recession, working down more into like the flat of the head here. And I do that really because that is where my elevations begin to change, as well as possible points of over direction to develop this shape. So again, everything was straight down, really low elevation. Really, it's like one finger. My middle finger is resting against the face, and now I'm going to begin to come down, letting that last section just slip out of the fingers. And as I begin to work through these next two bits of this section, I'm going to begin to slide my left hand, which is holding the hair, down ever so slowly to begin to elongate the shape. And that's the nice thing when you're utilizing the razor that you can do, is you kind of like chase your fingers with the razor to create a really drastic, like short to long progression of lengths. So the razor definitely gives you a little bit more freedom and accessibility to create like these kind of like drastic short to long lengths. So now coming back in for this last third, dropping it down. Now looking at the tips of my fingers, because the tips of my fingers should be pointing to where I want that length and shape to go. So I could put the comb in my hand, and that's now the natural extension of my fingers, and that's pointing to where the length of the haircut should be. If I didn't check it, my fingertips are pointing like so, I could pretty much tell you that I'm going to take that length off too short. So always just watching where my tips are going on this right-hand side, and then on the opposite side, I'd be watching where my knuckles are going. And that's from a right-handed hair cutter, though. For the lefties out there, that would just be opposite. So now sliding back in, I've got the pre-existing section. There it goes. It just slips out of the hand. Checking that finger angle. And then before I cut, coming back in with that razor, we'll begin just getting it moving back in with the tip. And then a very soft up and down motion, what we call the stroke of the razor, to create the solidity of the edge of the haircut. There's the length. And now you can begin to see that round shape just beginning to develop. I'm shorter in the front, and it's beginning to descend to longer lengths towards the back. So Very, very simple definition of a round shape. So now I'm going to continue back utilizing these diagonal back sections. Again, coming back in with the wide teeth of the cutting comb. We'll just pin that back and away, releasing it down, offering it a little bit of water, and we'll continually move through. So now coming back into the tight teeth of the cutting comb, working through that first third, which is really around the frontal bone. And I can check my pre-existing section, but really once I feel that density change, because the pre-existing section now just slips out of the back end of the finger, and I'm going to begin to now just mirror this new section right into the previous. And you can see that I've changed the elevation ever so slightly. I was at one finger for the first one. Now I'm sitting about 2 fingers off, just to begin to build some of that graduation through the bottom edge. The thing is, I don't need to elevate it too high because the stroke of the razor is creating natural graduation through the haircut as well. So now I've actually decreased the elevation through this section slightly to help build a little bit more strength through the line. And so we know as we begin to decrease and lower elevation, it generally builds more weight within the haircut. Now coming back in, again, working really with a decreased elevation, looking at that finger angle, now just beginning to chase it down, removing off the length. And then always, the cool thing about cutting textured hair is it instantly begins to show you what you're doing. Opposed to straighter hair can lay a little bit more two-dimensionally. The textured hair sits a bit more three-dimensionally, so I really begin to see that shape. Close down the razor and we'll move around. I'll do one more and walk you through it technically, and then I'll begin to kind of share with you a little bit about the world of blue. So you can see now it's definitely taking on a very steep kind of diagonal back section. And we'll just take this hair, just lightly pin it out of the way, offering it a little bit of water. Consistency is key. So the consistency of just being methodical within the way that you work. Coming back into that frontal, offering now a little bit of elevation, a little bit more so. Coming back with the tip of the scissor, but the stroke is still what I call a bit more closed. I'm not really opening up that stroke too much quite yet, because I want the edge of the haircut, the framework, to have definite substance to it. I really don't want to begin to loosen it up too much quite yet. So now as I come back into that second third, I can see the pre-existing section, just letting that slip out, elevating this one a little bit more than the previous, because I definitely have a line within the haircut now. So now I'm beginning to push some of that graduation through the edge, softening it up some, building some expansion through that line as well. So taking this back in, always checking that finger angle, letting that slip out, and then we'll come back in and just working back down and through. One more bit just to chase it off, and this is the length. It's a little too dry. In fact, I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'll chase that off on the next section. So we'll close down the razor. So obviously, if you look at the pre-done shape, which is missing some finishing product, and we'll kind of talk about some finishing product in that one when we're done with the wet shape over here. It's definitely got a very 70s-esque, if you will, feeling to it, right? Where obviously these layered shapes, which were definitely kind of referenced as shags, sat a little bit heavier through the back, but very open around the face. So it's very, very open. And I think we've seen a lot of shag variations through the last couple of years. And if we look at the shag when it first kind of came out a couple of years ago, everything was a lot slimmer through the sides and the back of the head, really releasing a lot more weight. And the length through the top were quite a bit shorter, almost like a little bit like these kind of mullety shags. And then that transitioned into what people were starting to call the wolf cut, which was just another variation of the shag. But we've now seen the shag kind of evolve into these heavier shapes as it begins to transition throughout the back of the head, but making it still very open around the face. You know, if you look back into, a historical perspective, like people like Farrah Fawcett definitely wore variants of shaggier shapes like this. You can go back into, some of our iconic leaders like Sassoons. They had a haircut called the shake, which was a variant of this, but worked maybe a little bit more layering through it. And we could talk about that, how you can simply change the shape by now just elevating a bit more so with every section. And that would just release more weight through the internal aspect. So really understanding your dynamics within cutting hair, obviously what tension's going to do, what your over direction points are going to do in elevation. At that point, and you really understand those principles and you understand the principles of shape and technique, you can really then begin to take these ideas and these inspirations and transition them to suit and to create a look that is bespoke to the individual that's sitting in front of you. And that's what it's really all about. It's not about doing what we call maybe like a cookie cutter haircut. This is just an idea. And the idea is to practice your craft so you can then become more comfortable behind the chair to offer quick changes that are suited now for the individual, the client. So cutting hair that's, again, suitable. Releasing that. So now as I work through, I'm working definitely more into the inside of the haircut, so I'm going to become a little bit looser with the razor work. I'm offering a little bit more elevation now through it, but you can see I'm going to begin to really open that stroke up, and that's going to help produce some layering through the inside. And it's going to help soften up the graduation as I work into these lower realms of elevation. So really within one section, I am cutting the technique of layering and then transitioning it into the technique of graduation. So now as we work back into the length, I'll spin around here, just utilizing over direction, dragging that forward to create the exaggerated length, as well as chasing my fingers with that razor to keep the length. Moving through. So the parasol idea is definitely a word that Garen likes to use. And we got to speak about Garen because we're talking about blue today. And Garen is definitely a name within hairdressing that I hope we all know. Today, he's definitely a living legend. But Garen is one of the co-founders of R&Co with Howard McLaren. But Garen is really the inspiration and the man behind blue. So if you don't know who Garen is an iconic hairdresser. He's done more Vogue covers than any other hairdresser alive today, as well as probably ever will, because that industry has definitely changed and shifted within the last few years. And he's really known for doing like these really strong transformational looks. Like transformations on people like Madonna, when Madonna was from the teeny bopper going into, Marilyn Monroe. He created that transition on Madonna. He took Lady Gaga from being Lady Gaga, who was completely like a character, and to the beautiful woman of Lady Gaga and the way she represents herself now. Victoria Beckham, from Posh Spice to Victoria Beckham. He took care of Linda Evangelista's hair through primarily all of the 90s. So he's got this really strong, call it like an A-list clientele. But for a lot of those celebrity types, when they were going to like go through a drastic change or transformation, Garen was the one that was responsible for a great deal of them through the 80s, 90s, and still modern day. So now if you think about his career path and being more of an editorial type of stylist and doing session work, the idea of building something up and quickly breaking it down, being a hairstyle, is really what editorial stylists and session stylists need to do. So all of the product within the blue realm of the world has that capabilities where you can build it up and then quickly comb through it to break it down, or to utilize the dry shampoo to begin to remove out, you know, excess oils. If you did like more of an oily look, utilizing like the optical illusion oil, just to begin to come back in and to pull the oils back out of the hair. And all the hairsprays, no matter if you're utilizing the workable spray, which would be like our flexible hairspray, or Colt Classic, which is a little bit more of a medium hold, you can easily set the hair, but then for the next look, brush right through it without it obviously flaking, but it coming right back into the state of feeling like hair without the buildup on it. So that's of utmost importance within part of the creation of the product. Also, there's a huge sustainability factor behind it. All the product is 100% vegan. It's we do what we call one tree planted. So for every product that's purchased, we're giving back money towards rebuilding the forests. And right now our focus is back in on Australia from the deadly wildfires that happened through Australia a few years back, and rebuilding the forest back through Australia. It's gluten-free. It's obviously not tested on animals if it's done vegan, but it's, you know, free of all parabens. So essentially everything that people are trying to walk away from within hair care, it's completely free. The other thing that's really unique about it is it's 100% post-consumer recycled plastics out of all the packaging. So everything is really, I guess, giving back to the earth in some way, and we're really trying to leave no footprint within the creation of this product. So now moving through the inside of the shape, I'm getting a little bit more loose with the razor, utilizing a bit more elevation now. But the tension has stayed the same, definitely consistent within that realm. And my points of over direction have maintained. It's the elevations are changing, and I'm beginning to elevate it slightly more so now through my subsequent sections. Please, like I say, I don't have the comments available to see. So if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment bar. And if you're just joining us, what we're doing is we're cutting a really soft little round layered shape that has minimal graduation through it. Something that we're referencing as a bit of a parasol shape. We're utilizing the plie razor to create a soft edge. And, you know, some people say don't ever cut curly hair with the razor. You know, I don't personally believe in that. I think you can try to utilize the razor on most textures of hair. Essentially, if the hair is not responding in the way that you would like it to, put that tool down and pick up, you know, the scissor. But also, if you watch the way I'm utilizing the razor, I'm not going into the mid shafts and really blowing it out, meaning going deep in to the internal aspect of the hair. If I did work like this, working through it, that can definitely create some frizziness through the shape. But sometimes, you know, I think, especially today, what makes, I think, curly hair, wavier hair kind of cool is that there is a frizzy kind of aspect to it. You know, hair should look lived in, should look like it should be touched, you know? So the days of like your curls or your waves looking kind of gelled to your head is a bit passe. I'm going to work down into this length, pull that back forward. Now this is decreasing the elevation ever so slightly because I'm working into that center back of the head where these lengths really haven't been touched. So again, when I'm looking to build the framework of the haircut or the outline shape, I'm going to use a lower point of elevation, because we know that the higher we lift something, the more weight we begin to release out of the hair. And really that's the one thing that we're doing within cutting hair, styling hair. It's just about weight management. We building it, or we releasing it, we creating expansion within it. So it's like, what is your technique doing to change the dynamics of the weight within the haircut? So just a few more sections. So now as I begin to work through what we'll call like this crown area, I'm going to definitely get a little bit higher within the elevation and a bit more broad within the stroke, and get that elbow up high just so you can see, because I want this to become to really become alive on the inside. And that's going to begin to help build out more of the expansion through the kind of top interior of the head and letting it feel a little bit looser. As I begin to now work down and around, I'll begin to decrease it ever so slightly, but still staying broad within the stroke of the razor. And then back down, decreasing as I'm working more into the outline shape of the haircut. Put that comb down. I think I got another one quite like it over here. Let's see. Yeah, that's perfect. And then lastly, I've got one more section, which is going to take care of that last little bit of the tail, as well as I'll come back through the mid of this haircut, center back, because of obviously my points of over direction forward, it's going to wind up with a bit of a tail when it all comes together. So we'll talk about how we can keep that tail and what it does, or we can begin to flatten it out. Okay, first bit, chase off this last bit of the corner. And then what I'm going to do is give yourselves a bit of a change of perspective there. Now as I begin to work into that center back, I want to make sure I take all this length, get it within my hand, and begin now just to incorporate it within the haircut. Cool. So now you can definitely see I've got this bit of a tail right there. Again, that's created from the mass points of over direction forward. So we're going to wet this down, and we'll come right through the center back, and we'll begin just to soften up that shape. So releasing, just kind of, before I even do anything, I'm always just looking at the shape and how it's began to develop, to develop. You think it'd be Monday. I'm going to get stuck on my words. I guess it is technically a hairdresser's Monday. It's Tuesday morning. A lot of us don't work on Mondays. Well, that's the way it used to be. Everything's kind of shifted within work schedules, I feel. A little bit more water. There we go. So now, if I wanted to keep this really exaggerated shape, I could definitely just call it done for the most part. I may just kind of lightly clean up a little bits here and there. But sometimes these shapes, as they begin to grow out, you've had those clients that come in and it looks like a heavy V in the back. It's because everything was dragged forward and cut into some sort of frontal layering and then just left back. They never came back in and reestablished a basic perimeter line. There's nothing wrong with that if that's what you're looking to do and that's what your individual client is looking for. But let's say you wanted to plane that kind of like round shape out and make it look a little bit more, call it blunt. So if we look back in on the pre-done, you can definitely see I've got that same silhouette, the same profile, but as I come into the back, I've just lightly came back through and began to lift it. So because this is all layered above, there's no need for myself to come back in and have to section through this. I'm just going to drag it down, and I'm going to come right through here and just begin to take off that last bit. And that's going to begin to plane it out once it begins to dry. And we can do the same thing through the internal aspects of the layering, because if I pull this section out here right into the back, center back, because of, again, the over direction forward on the right and left panel, I'm definitely going to find this tail bit. So if I want to take that out, I'm just going to come right through, and I can work a little bit more freely. Remove that off, and that's going to definitely give a little bit more lift right through that kind of crown area. I can take that bit away and come back into the next piece. And begin to lift it, and I probably got one more little bit right underneath the occipital. Let's see. Very light amount, so we'll just take this away. Simple. So hair cutting doesn't need to be complex. Hair cutting is already complex enough in the sense of that we work in a salon, and every hour we've got clients that come in with completely different textures of hair, completely different personalities, personas, lifestyles, and to create looks that are really kind of unique and exclusive to them. That's what makes hair cutting complex. But really the theory of it, I always say that I should be able to teach the theory of cutting hair to my 13-year-old boy at home within an hour. You know what I mean? Shapes, we only have 3 of them. Techniques, there's really only 3 of them. And it depends on what philosophies you, I guess, live to within cutting hair. And then we've got, different dynamics, which you talked about: tension, elevation over direction. And then we have our body dynamics and understanding, obviously, what our lower body is doing to our upper body when we're creating shapes and techniques and so forth. So really, I mean, the idea of it, it's very simple. The complexity of it is taking those ideas and principles and adapting them to individuals that are unique in their own right. So now we're going to come into a little bit of finishing. And out of blue, I'm going to utilize 2 different products in the wet form. The first thing I'm going to start out with is a little bit of the Essential Hair Tonic. And this is a really light setting spray. It's got a very light hold to it, so it's definitely not something that I'd want to utilize as a cutting lotion, because it's got a little bit of memory, if you will, and it have I don't want to say a stick, because it's always very touchable. But if you use too much, it can begin to obviously, I think, change the natural integrity of the hair. So give that a light shake. I'm just going to begin to work this through the outer shell, but not just as important as the outer shell. I want to be able to lift up the hair and really work it through the insides. And that's going to help just continually hydrate the hair, nourishing that curl pattern. Second thing we'll come back in with is the Super Style Cream. So this is a leave-in type of conditioner, creme. So because of the curly hair, especially on the mannequin, I'm going to use a heavier dollop of that. And we're going to take the Super Style Cream into the hands, really emulsifying it, working it through. And then we're going to come back in really from the ends. I'm just going to begin to work this from the ends, pushing it into the mid shafts, hydrating that curl. And you can see how much product I had on my hand. This curly hair just absorbed it because of the porosity of this mannequin head. It's curly hair, but it's been so chemically created. So I'm going to offer a little bit more. So you can go into all different ways of setting curls, you know what I mean? That would be a whole different hairbrain live we could do. We could finger set these to create a little bit more uniformity. We could wrap them around 2 fingers to begin to stretch it out. I could utilize a finger, let it drop, take a pin curl clip it on the bottom just to begin to stretch the curl out if I was looking to elongate the shape more so. I've seen it where we take in makeup brushes, flip the makeup brush over, now utilizing the circumference of the handle of the brush, and now wrapping the curl around that to begin to stretch it out. If I just come back in and begin to scrunch it, it's obviously going to take the natural curl pattern. It's going to tighten it up slightly, but it's going to keep it more just traditional and uniform on how it naturally is. So now for the blow dry, I'll utilize a diffuser on a high heat and medium fan speed. And I can do this multiple ways. If I was looking to flatten the shape out, I could just keep the blow dryer going down the shaft of hair, and with the weight of gravity dragging it out, just kind of keep it like so. If I wanted to have more body through the hair, I would ask the individual to flip up and over, so head between the legs. Obviously, now at that point, what you've done is you're utilizing gravity to give it a little bit more root lift. And then I would come back in and still diffuse it, but going down the shaft. And then I can also pick it up and scoop it in and set it within the basket of the diffuser. So really, there's so many different ways that you can diffuse the hair. There's so many different ways that you can cut curly hair. Some people believe in only cutting it dry. Some people say cut it wet. Some people say no tension. Some people say a lot of tension. Just understand your tool, what you're doing, and the effect that it's going to create. But I believe in being diverse as you possibly can as a hairdresser and understanding as many principles as you can so you can make your own decisions and not feel forced into one thing. So I would just continually diffuse this in this manner until it became 100% dry. And then once it was dry, and this is another reason for the pre-done, so you don't have to watch me sit and diffuse, because that's like watching paint dry. I'll come back over here. So once it's dry, this is Janet's sister, Janice. That's Janet over there. This is Janice, maybe a little Janis Joplin, maybe not. This has been dried with the Super Style Cream and Tonic. And at that point, what I'd like to do is come back in with a little bit of optical illusion oil. And I'm going to begin to work this through some of the curls, and it's going to help create a bit more shine and some definition within the curl pattern. So give it 3 pumps in the hand. Again, emulsifying that back into the hand. And then similar to how I worked the Super Style Cream, just beginning to like scrunch it through. But now as you can see it dry, even though the Super Style Cream is like a cream leave-in conditioner, it does give it a little bit of memory where I can begin to lift this hair, and now I can actually begin to expand it out even more so, creating a bit more width and height through it. And then if I wanted to get a bit more expansive within the shape, I could come in with our Lifestyle or Volume and Texture Spray, which is in an aerosol. And that's going to definitely begin to pump the shape up even more so. So a little bit goes a long way, and just kind of like waft it back down. And once that gets in the hair, begin just kind of like working it back through, scrunching it. You don't be afraid to touch the curls. It's something that as a young hairdresser, I was always afraid to touch the curls because I was afraid of it to possibly break apart or get frizzy. But as I've learned through, I think, my years of doing hair, like I say, hair should be touchable, should definitely feel a little bit lived in, but I want like to create a slight air of frizziness on it today. But I also want to take that shape and like kind of expand it. Once again, like deconsolidate it. It gets so kind of like consolidated once it dries natural like so. So I want it to become airy. And then lastly, This is called Reflective Shine hairspray. So I'm going to give it a good shake. And this is just going to help out with giving it a bit more shine, as well as I can use this to create a little bit more separation within the curl. And just let that begin to dry through. So a little bit of a recap. What we've done is we've worked with a round shape, incorporating some layering as well as graduation through it. And you can see the graduation really on the edge. We definitely have this round line, but you can see now how as it begins to build up upon each other, creating this expansion. That's going into the technique of graduation. And as we begin to look now really through this internal aspect of the haircut here, how it begins to lift and becomes a little bit lighter, that's now working into the technique of layering. Again, everything was done with over direction forward, utilizing these diagonal back sections. We split the head into two different panels, work diagonal back sections, dragging everything forward, utilizing a very low point of elevation to the first section to begin to create the line. Everything we kind of worked in thirds. So I did the frontal bone, then I did around the parietal region, then I did the lower flats of the head, low point of elevation. Subsequent sections, I began to play with the elevation, lifting it ever so slightly, as well as began opening the stroke of the blade. There's no one way to do this. It just really depends on the look you're looking to create and the aesthetic that your individual is looking to have, not to mention the hair texture. If somebody was really, really thick and really like had a lot of hair, I might just begin elevating right out of the gate just to begin to really lighten everything up and become a bit more broad within the texture or the stroke of that blade to begin to loosen up the shape.